Cole Whitfield was 43 years old, and until that September, he believed he had two things that mattered: a father who loved him and a wife who did the same. He was a civil engineer, steady, principled, the kind of man who caught million-dollar mistakes quietly and never needed the credit. When his father George died and left behind nothing but a small house and an old Ford truck, Cole grieved the way humble men grieve, without spectacle. Then George's estate attorney handed him a folder, and Cole discovered his father had secretly built a billion-dollar empire and never told a soul. 3 days later, someone ran a red light and hit his truck at full speed. Cole survived, but lying in that ICU bed, bruised, bleeding, and completely still, he made the coldest decision of his life. He would let his wife believe he was dying. And when she leaned down and whispered into his ear, believing no one could hear her, Cole learned exactly who she was and exactly what she had done. What happened next, she never saw coming. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The September heat pressed down on the mourners like a heavy blanket, making Cole's dark suit feel even more confining than it had that morning. He stood at the edge of his father's grave, watching as people began to drift away from the service. The sound of their footsteps on the dry grass seemed unnaturally loud in the heavy afternoon air. George Whitfield's grave was simple, just like the man himself had been. No elaborate headstone, no fancy engravings, just clean, precise lettering on Georgia granite. Cole could almost hear his father's voice. "What's the point in making a fuss about it?" He felt Nadia shift beside him, her black dress rustling. Without looking, he knew she was checking her phone again. She'd been doing it throughout the service, quick, furtive glances when she thought no one was watching. 2 days ago, she'd asked about George's will for the second time, her voice carefully casual. "I just want to make sure everything's taken care of," she'd said, arranging her face into an expression of wifely concern. "You know how these things can get complicated." Cole remembered nodding, telling her what he believed was true, that there probably wasn't much beyond the house and whatever savings his father had managed to put aside. George had lived simply. 5 work shirts he rotated with military precision. The old Ford pickup he refused to replace, even when the transmission started giving him trouble. Sunday calls to Cole, always at 7 p.m., never missing once in 20 years. The remaining mourners were clustered in small groups now. Miss Ora, who had found George, stood with Aunt Paulette near the cemetery gate. They kept glancing in Cole's direction, their faces heavy with concern. A few of George's neighbors talked quietly among themselves, sharing stories about the man who would show up unasked to fix their porches, their fences, their loose shingles. A man Cole didn't recognize approached through the thinning crowd. His dark suit was expensive but understated, his manner professionally somber. "Mr. Whitfield?" The man extended his hand. "Preston Ware. I was your father's estate attorney." Cole shook his hand automatically, noting the firm grip, the direct gaze. Estate attorney. The words seemed incongruous with everything he knew about his father. "I'd like you to call my office at your earliest convenience regarding your father's estate." Ware produced a business card, cream-colored and understated like his suit. "There are matters we need to discuss." Cole took the card, its weight somehow significant in his fingers. Before he could respond, Nadia stepped forward, a manila envelope in her perfectly manicured hands. "Cole." Her voice was steady, practiced. "I'm sorry. I've been sitting on this for a while. I didn't want to do this today, but my attorney said waiting any longer creates complications." The envelope felt heavy, despite containing only a few sheets of paper. Divorce papers, filed, signed, dated. The letters seemed to swim before his eyes for a moment, before snapping into sharp focus. He looked at his wife. 8 years of marriage condensed into this single moment. She met his gaze without flinching, which somehow made it worse. There was no guilt there, no hesitation, just calm calculation. Cole slipped both items, the business card and the divorce papers, into his jacket pocket. The fabric felt too thin to contain the weight of what they represented. He turned back to his father's grave, aware of a vast shape forming in his mind, something huge and dark, whose edges he couldn't quite make out yet. The drive home was silent. Cole kept his eyes on the road, his hands steady on the wheel. Nadia sat beside him, perfectly composed, as if she hadn't just detonated their marriage at his father's funeral. He maintained basic courtesy, held the door when they arrived home, asked if she wanted coffee, responded appropriately to her careful attempts at conversation. Later, lying in the spare room he'd quietly moved into 2 weeks ago when George died, Cole stared at the ceiling. The business card and the envelope lay on the nightstand, their presence like a pulse in the dark room. One decision crystallized in his mind with the clarity of his father's Sunday phone calls. Before he did anything else, before he even looked at those divorce papers, he would meet with Preston Ware alone. The morning sun cast long shadows across the driveway as Cole backed his car out. He'd told Nadia he needed to handle some administrative paperwork for his father's estate, a simple truth that revealed nothing of his actual destination. She'd nodded, barely looking up from her coffee, already absorbed in her phone. Downtown Macon was quiet this early. Cole found Preston Ware's office easily. A well-maintained brick building with discreet signage, the kind of place that spoke of old money and quiet influence. The receptionist led him to a conference room where fresh coffee and water waited on a polished table. Preston Ware entered precisely on time, carrying a leather portfolio and the same composed demeanor he'd shown at the funeral. He sat across from Cole and placed his hands flat on the table. "Before we begin," Ware said, "I want you to understand that what I'm about to share may be overwhelming. We'll take it at whatever pace you need." Cole nodded, noting the careful choice of words. "I appreciate that. Your father's estate," Ware began, opening the portfolio, "is valued at $1.2 billion. Cole's coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. He set it down slowly, the gentle click against the table abnormally loud in the sudden silence. "I'm going to say that again," Ware continued, his voice steady. $1.2 billion. Cole found himself studying the grain of the conference table, tracing its patterns while his mind attempted to process the number. "How?" The word came out, barely above a whisper. "Over 40 years, your father assembled an extraordinary portfolio." Ware began laying out documents. Commercial real estate across 3 states, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, agricultural land bought during downturns, private equity positions in regional companies, all of it structured through a network of LLCs that kept his name out of public records. Cole looked at the documents, property deeds, corporate filings, bank statements. The numbers were real, concrete. His father's quiet empire laid bare in black and white. "Why didn't he ever—" Cole's voice trailed off. "Tell you?" Ware smiled slightly. "George once told me, I've seen what money does to families when they know it's coming. My son is going to earn his life, and then he's going to inherit a foundation." Something tightened in Cole's chest at those words. His father's voice, his father's wisdom, even now reaching across the void. "There's something else you need to know." Ware pulled out another document. "The will is explicit. Everything transfers solely to you, with zero spousal claim possible. Your father inserted that provision 7 years ago, 1 year into your marriage to Nadia." Cole felt the air leave his lungs in a slow exhale. 7 years ago. His father had seen something even then, had taken steps to protect against it. "Did my father trust my wife, Mr. Ware?" Preston Ware was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his portfolio, one final time, and withdrew a sealed envelope. "Your father asked me to hold this for you. He said you'd know when the right time was to open it." Cole took the envelope, his father's handwriting on the front. Cole. Nothing else. The drive home was surreal. Streets he'd known his whole life seemed different somehow, as if the weight of $1.2 billion altered even the familiar geometry of Macon. Now he understood Nadia's timing perfectly, filing for divorce the day after the funeral, before the estate became public. She'd known something was coming. She just hadn't known how much. He pulled into the driveway, the house he'd left just hours ago, feeling like a stage set now, a place where performances were given rather than lives lived. Nadia was in the kitchen when he came in. How did the paperwork go? Her voice was carefully modulated, interested, but not too interested. Fine, he said. Just administrative things. He managed a small smile. I'm going to rest for a bit. Upstairs, in the spare room that had become his sanctuary, Cole sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the envelope. His father's handwriting seemed to pulse slightly in the afternoon light. He broke the seal carefully and unfolded the pages inside. He read it once, quickly, then again, slower. By the third reading, his hands were completely steady, though everything else in the world had shifted on its axis. Cole sat in his childhood bedroom, the familiar space now feeling both comfort and witness as he unfolded the 4 pages of his father's letter. The afternoon light slanted through the window, catching dust motes in its beam, as George's neat, measured handwriting began to speak. Son, the letter began, if you're reading this, then certain things have already been set in motion that I hoped would never come to pass. What follows will be difficult to hear. Take your time with it. Remember who you are. Cole leaned back against the headboard, the same spot where he'd studied for engineering exams years ago, and let his father's words wash over him. George explained how, 18 months earlier, he'd noticed something that didn't sit right. Nadia had been making inquiries about his business holdings, careful, distanced inquiries through third parties that were clearly designed to avoid detection, the kind of moves that spoke of calculation rather than curiosity. I hired James Morton, George wrote, a private investigator I've known for 20 years. I asked him to look carefully, and what he found confirmed everything I'd been feeling, but couldn't prove. Cole's chest tightened as he read about Derek Okafor, a mid-level real estate developer who'd been in contact with Nadia for over 2 years. Their meetings were careful, professional on the surface, coffee shops in Atlanta, business lunches that could be explained away. But the pattern was clear to anyone who knew what to look for. Derek Okafor has done this before, George's steady handwriting continued. He identifies wealthy targets, cultivates relationships with family members, usually spouses, positions himself to benefit from whatever financial disruption follows. In Charlotte, 5 years ago, he did the same thing to a woman named Beverly Okafor. Cole sat up straighter, reading the next part twice to make sure he understood it correctly. Beverly Okafor is still legally his wife, George wrote. He never formally divorced her. He simply moved on when the operation was complete, leaving her financially devastated. I have included Morton's full report, with documentation, in the envelope Preston is holding for you. But you need to understand this now. The woman you married has been planning something with Derek Okafor for at least 2 years. The only reason they haven't moved yet is because they don't know the full scope of what's available to move on. The letter continued with quiet precision, laying out dates, meetings, patterns of behavior that George had documented. Then the tone shifted, became more personal. I tried to protect you by not telling you this sooner, George wrote. I believed that telling you would hurt you in a way you weren't ready for. I may have been wrong about that, but I am not wrong about this. That woman does not love you. She loves what she believes you are worth, and she does not yet know what you are actually worth, which means you still have time. Cole read the final paragraphs twice more, his father's voice so clear he could almost hear it in the quiet room. You are more than they believe you to be, more than I perhaps showed you. Build what is yours and let nothing diminish it. Not grief, not betrayal, and not the smallness of people who could not see you clearly. With hands that had grown steadier with each reading, Cole folded the letter carefully and placed it in his jacket pocket. He stood for a moment, looking at himself in the mirror above his old dresser. His face showed nothing of what he'd just absorbed. Good. He went downstairs to find Nadia preparing dinner. A normal evening ritual that now felt like watching a play he'd seen too many times to believe anymore. He helped set the table, made appropriate small talk about his day, watched her perform the role of concerned wife with the same precision she'd always shown. When she went to check on something in the kitchen, Cole took out his phone and called Aunt Paulette. His father's sister answered on the second ring. "Cole, are you all right? I need to see you tomorrow morning," he said quietly. "It's important." There was a slight pause, then, "Come at 9. I'll make coffee." "Thank you." He ended the call just as Nadia returned with the serving dish. Looking across the table at her now, Cole felt the last 8 years of marriage dissolve like smoke. All the moments he'd believed were real, all the times he'd defended their connection to others who'd seen what he hadn't. In their place settled something colder, cleaner, and infinitely more useful. Absolute clarity about what needed to be done. He passed her the salad bowl and smiled politely when she thanked him. Tomorrow would begin something new. Tonight was for observation, for noting every detail of her performance, now that he finally recognized it for what it was. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cracked pavement of Miller's Diner, a faded establishment just outside Macon, where truckers and early risers found refuge in bitter coffee and heavy breakfast plates. Cole chose it deliberately. Neutral ground, away from familiar eyes. Aunt Paulette was already there when he arrived, seated in a corner booth with 2 steaming mugs waiting. She stood to hug him, her embrace carrying the weight of everything they hadn't yet said. "You read the letter." Not a question. Cole nodded, sliding into the booth across from her. "I need to hear everything you know." Paulette wrapped her hands around her coffee mug, her rings catching the morning light. "George told me about the investigator 18 months ago. He needed someone to know, to verify he wasn't seeing things that weren't there. I watched that woman at family dinners for 2 years, Cole. Watched her ask careful questions about George's business interests, about his health, about his plans." She reached into her bag and pulled out a thin folder. "These are copies of some of Morton's reports. George gave them to me for safekeeping. The meetings with Derek Okafor. Always just professional enough to explain away. The pattern of inquiries through third parties about George's holdings. The way she started paying attention to his medication schedule last year." Cole felt something cold settle in his chest. "His medication?" Paulette's face tightened. 6 weeks before George died, Morton reported overhearing a conversation between Nadia and Derek at a coffee shop in Atlanta. They were discussing George's age, his declining health, specifically the heart medication he'd started taking. The tone was, she paused, choosing her words carefully, clinical, like people discussing a timeline. Neither of them said the word aloud. They didn't need to. Cole drove home alone, his father's old Ford eating up the miles as his mind processed everything Paulette had shared. The morning light had turned harsh, the kind of glare that makes you squint even behind sunglasses. He was 20 minutes from home when it happened. The black SUV ran the red light at the county intersection, moving fast, too fast for reaction time. Cole saw it in the fraction of a second before impact. Dark paint, tinted windows, aimed directly at his driver's side door. The crash was deafening. Metal screamed against metal. Glass exploded inward. The world spun in a kaleidoscope of light and shadow before everything went black. He regained consciousness to the rhythm of ambulance sirens and the efficient voices of EMTs. Pain radiated from his ribs. Something warm trickled down his face from above his left eye. But he was alive. Somehow, impossibly alive. Later, he would learn why. George had reinforced the Ford's door panels years ago, a quiet modification that saved his son's life. Even in death, his father's foresight was still protecting him. The hospital lights were too bright. Doctors spoke in measured tones about monitoring for brain injury and internal bleeding. "The next 48 hours are critical," they said. "We need to watch for signs of increased intracranial pressure." Cole lay in the ICU bed, letting their words wash over him as his engineer's mind assembled the pieces. The accident's angle, precisely targeted at the driver's door. The speed, calculated for maximum impact. The timing, days after his meeting with Preston Ware about the estate, a meeting Nadia didn't know about but someone watching him would have noticed. This wasn't random. This was architecture. In that moment of clarity, Cole made his decision. He regulated his breathing into the shallow rhythm of unconsciousness. He let his face go slack, his body completely still. When the nurse came to check his vitals, he gave no response to her gentle attempts to rouse him. 2 hours passed in that practiced stillness before he heard the distinctive click of heels on linoleum. Nadia's voice carried down the hallway, the perfect pitch of devastation, as she spoke to the attending physician. "How bad is it? When will he wake up?" "We're monitoring closely," the doctor replied. "The next 48 hours will tell us more about the extent of potential brain injury." Cole remained motionless as Nadia entered the room. He tracked her movement through sound alone, her heels crossing to his bedside, the soft rustle of expensive fabric as she sat in the visitor's chair, the carefully timed catch in her breath that any observer would read as barely contained grief. He waited, every muscle held in perfect stillness, as his wife began her performance for the benefit of the hospital staff. The steady beep of the heart monitor filled the ICU room as Nadia's heels clicked across the floor. Cole kept his breathing shallow and measured, his face completely relaxed despite the sharp pain in his ribs. Through his closed eyelids, he sensed the fluorescent lights and could track Nadia's movement by sound alone. "Oh, baby." Nadia's voice carried the perfect note of distress. "What happened to you?" A nurse moved efficiently around the bed, checking IV lines and monitors. "His vitals are stable," she assured Nadia. "The doctor will be in shortly to discuss his condition." "Thank you," Nadia replied, her voice thick with practiced emotion. Can I just sit with him?" "Of course. Press the call button if you need anything or notice any change." Cole tracked the nurse's footsteps as she left the room. The chair beside his bed creaked softly as Nadia settled into it. She took his hand, her grip careful, mindful of the IV line. Her wedding ring felt cold against his skin. For several minutes, she maintained her vigil in silence. The nurses passed by at regular intervals, their shadows briefly darkening the doorway. Nadia would squeeze his hand whenever they passed, a small gesture for their benefit. Through it all, Cole kept his body completely still. The pain in his ribs had settled into a steady throb, but he didn't allow even a flicker of discomfort to cross his face. He had learned patience from his father, the ability to remain motionless and wait for what needed to reveal itself. Finally, the floor went quiet. The nurse's station chatter dimmed. The last set of footsteps faded down the hallway. The chair creaked again as Nadia leaned forward. Cole felt her breath against his ear, warm and intimate, a grotesque parody of affection that made him want to recoil, but he remained perfectly still. "I know you can't hear me," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "But I need to say this because I've been carrying it, and I need it to be somewhere outside of me." She paused, adjusting her position slightly. "Derek's man wasn't supposed to leave so much evidence. We're going to have to deal with that. But you're not going to make it, baby. The doctors just don't know it yet." Her hand tightened almost imperceptibly on his. "And when you're gone, everything your father built, everything you never even knew enough to protect, is going to come to me as your wife. Because I filed before the estate was made public. Because I planned this better than you could have imagined." The monitor continued its steady beeping. Cole focused on maintaining the same shallow breathing pattern, even as rage and clarity crystallized inside him with equal force. "You were never going to be what I needed," Nadia continued, her whisper taking on an almost gentle tone that made it worse somehow. "I'm sorry it had to be this way. But this is the way it had to be." She pulled back slowly. Cole heard the soft rustle of fabric as she straightened her blouse. And then, with perfect timing, she began to cry. Soft, controlled sobs that coincided exactly with the return of footsteps in the hallway. "Mrs. Whitfield?" The nurse's voice was sympathetic. "Can I get you anything?" "No, thank you," Nadia managed, her voice breaking just enough. Seeing him like this, I understand. Try to stay hopeful. These first 48 hours are critical, but he's stable." Cole remained motionless as the conversation continued around him. Every word, every inflection, every calculated pause in Nadia's performance was being catalogued and stored. The shape of her betrayal was now completely clear. Not just the accident, but the years of planning that led to it, the careful timing of the divorce filing, the partnership with Derek, the cold assessment of his worth against his father's hidden wealth. Through the long night that followed, Cole maintained his stillness as Nadia came and went. She would return with coffee, speak softly to the nurses, make phone calls in the hallway about postponing meetings and arranging to work remotely. Every action precisely calibrated to appear as a devoted wife facing possible tragedy. He captured it all in his mind. Her words, her composure, her performance. For the next 40 hours, he would remain in this state of practiced unconsciousness, gathering every detail he needed. The pain in his ribs became secondary to the clarity of purpose that now filled him. His father had taught him patience. Nadia was about to learn exactly what that patience could build. The second morning in the ICU brought a new set of footsteps, heavier, more deliberate than Nadia's careful heel clicks. Cole maintained his practiced stillness as two people entered his room. "How's he looking?" A man's voice, smooth, confident, with the practiced warmth of someone who moves through expensive rooms. Derek Okafor. Cole had never seen him, but Paulette's description of his voice, like honey over steel, was perfect. "The same," Nadia replied quietly. "They're still monitoring for brain activity." Fabric rustled as Derek moved to the foot of Cole's bed. The metal rail creaked slightly under his grip. "Timeline on the estate proceedings?" "Preston Ware's office hasn't set anything in motion yet. They're waiting to assess Cole's condition before determining next steps." Nadia's voice was stripped of its earlier performance, businesslike, direct. "Good. That gives us room. The Florida account is structured exactly how we discussed. Once his legal status is formally assessed, everything moves through the channels we established." Derek spoke with the calm authority of someone reviewing a routine business plan. "The driver's being handled. My contact confirmed he's across state lines, and the vehicle's been properly disposed of. And the accident report? Clean. Local jurisdiction. Overworked department. They'll process it as a standard traffic violation, especially given the location." A pause. "You're sure about the will?" "I saw the envelope Preston gave him at the funeral. Cole never had time to review anything before." Nadia's voice trailed off. "The filing date on the divorce papers establishes my position clearly. Once he's declared—" "Let's focus on immediate priorities," Derek cut in smoothly. "I'll have Marcus run the account verification tomorrow. Keep everything moving exactly as planned." Their voices dropped lower, discussing technical details about wire transfers and LLC structures. Cole memorized every name, every reference, every fragment of information they let slip. Derek's confidence was the particular arrogance of someone who had never faced real consequences, who mistook the absence of resistance for the absence of danger. They left after 20 minutes. Cole remained motionless through the rest of the day, through the night, through the steady rhythm of nurse checks and vital sign monitoring. On the morning of the second day, he opened his eyes. "Doctor!" The nurse's excited voice carried down the hallway. "He's conscious!" Cole blinked slowly, letting his eyes adjust to the light. He made his movements careful, groggy. When the doctor arrived, Cole answered questions with deliberate confusion. Yes, he remembered driving. No, he wasn't sure what happened after that. Nadia arrived within 30 minutes, her heels announcing her approach. Cole turned his head slowly toward the door. Her performance was flawless. The catch in her breath, the trembling step forward, the perfectly timed tears. "Cole!" Her voice shook. "Baby, can you hear me?" He reached for her hand, letting his movements be unsteady. "Nadia." She broke down, pressing his hand to her face. Cole maintained his own performance with equal precision. The grateful husband, overwhelmed with relief, focused only on recovery. He thanked the doctors earnestly. He asked simple questions about the accident. He did everything expected of a man who had just returned to consciousness with no memory of the impact or what followed. That afternoon, Aunt Paulette visited. Cole watched her face as she entered, watched the fraction of a second when her eyes met his, and he knew that she knew. She sat beside him without a word and took his hand. He squeezed once, deliberately. She returned the squeeze with equal purpose. They sat in comfortable silence. No words were needed. Paulette had known George better than anyone, had watched him build an empire through patience and precise action. She recognized that same patience in Cole's eyes now. The following day, Cole was discharged. He let Nadia help him into the car, accepted her careful attention at home, and spoke warmly about wanting to focus on healing their relationship. When she mentioned the divorce papers, he shook his head gently. "The accident, it's given me perspective. Let's not make any decisions right now." She agreed readily, visibly relieved. Her relief was not the emotion of a wife grateful for reconciliation. It was the relief of someone whose plan was back on track. The morning after discharge, Cole dressed carefully in work clothes. "I need to check in with my crew," he told Nadia. "Just briefly. They're handling a critical phase of the Thompson project." "Are you sure you're ready?" Her concern was perfectly calibrated. "Just a quick visit," he assured her. "I'll be back for lunch." He drove to the job site, parked in his usual spot, and took out his phone. 3 calls would set everything in motion. He looked at the screen for a long moment, thinking about his father's patience, about precision, about the weight that properly distributed structures could bear. Cole sat in his truck at the job site, the morning sun warming the dashboard. The familiar sounds of construction, the rhythmic thud of hammer strikes, the whine of circular saws, the beeping of equipment in reverse, created a steady background pulse. He looked at his phone for a long moment, organizing his thoughts with the same precision he applied to load-bearing calculations. The first call was to Terence Hill. They hadn't spoken in months, but that was their friendship. Time didn't dilute its substance. Terence answered on the second ring. "Cole? Everything okay?" "No," Cole said quietly. "I need your help, Terence, and I need you to hear everything before you respond." For the next 12 minutes, Cole laid out the sequence of events with careful detail. George's death, the hidden wealth, Nadia's divorce filing, the accident, and everything he had heard in the hospital room. He described the Florida LLC Derek had mentioned, the references to accounts and transfers. His voice remained steady, controlled. When he finished, Terence was silent for several beats. Then, "Give me 4 days. I'll need complete access to your banking records and any documentation you have of joint accounts with Nadia. You'll have it within the hour." "Cole?" Terence's voice had the controlled precision that meant he was already working the problem. "I'll find everything. Every dollar, every transfer, every shell structure they built. 4 days." The second call was to Detective Alonzo Price. Preston had given Cole his number with a specific note. when you need someone who understands both evidence and discretion. Price's voice was professional, measured. Cole relayed what he had heard in the hospital room, Nadia's whispered confession, Derek's discussion of the driver and the accident report, every detail that pointed to premeditation. Price listened without interruption. "I have a contact in the sheriff's department," Price said when Cole finished. "I'll pull the accident report and traffic camera footage from the surrounding intersections immediately. Give me 48 hours for the initial documentation. The driver? If there's a connection between the registered owner and either your wife or Derek Okafor, we'll find it. Vehicle forensics, phone records, financial trails, everything gets documented properly." The third call was to Preston Ware. Cole's voice was calm, deliberate. "I need the estate transfer completed immediately and with complete discretion. And I need to understand Nadia's legal exposure given what's emerging." Preston absorbed Cole's account of the hospital room revelations without visible reaction. "The estate is entirely protected. Your father's provisions were explicit, and the transfer documentation is already prepared. I'll begin moving everything through the established channels today." A pause. "Regarding criminal exposure, I'm sending you the contact information for James Morton. He's a criminal attorney I trust completely. Call him today." Cole ended the call and sat watching his crew work. The Thompson Project's foundation was taking shape. Each pour precisely timed, each structural element properly placed. He had always understood buildings this way, as systems where every component had to bear its designated weight. What Nadia had built was about to collapse under its own pressure. 4 days later, Terrence called. His voice was controlled in the way it got when he had found something that genuinely disturbed him. "Over 3 years," Terrence said without preamble, "she moved $94,000 out of your joint accounts. Small increments, carefully timed to avoid automatic alerts. Everything went through 2 intermediary accounts into a Florida LLC co-owned by Nadia and Derek Okafor." He paused. "The LLC has no actual real estate holdings, just outgoing transfers, including one wire transfer 18 months ago to a private security contractor in South Carolina, a man named Daryl Faust. The connection? Faust has a prior arrest for vehicular assault, and his name appears in the sheriff's accident report as the registered owner of the black SUV that hit you." Terrence's voice was very precise. "Cole, she paid for the attempt on your life with money she stole from your own accounts." Cole absorbed this. Then he called Price. "The traffic cameras," Price said immediately. "We have footage from 4 intersections. The SUV followed your truck for 11 minutes before impact. No braking. Deliberate speed and angle. We also have phone records showing 3 calls between Derek Okafor and Faust in the 72 hours before the accident." He paused. "Cole, I have enough to take to the DA." "Not yet." Cole's voice was quiet. "I need 48 hours." Cole sat in George's kitchen, the afternoon light slanting through windows that had witnessed 40 years of his father's quiet discipline. He looked at his phone, each number he needed to dial representing another piece of the structure he was building. Not revenge, accountability. The distinction mattered. He called Nadia's mother first. Sarah Fontaine's voice carried the warmth it always had, even through speakerphone. "Cole, how are you holding up, sweetheart?" "Managing," he said, keeping his voice gentle. "I was hoping you and Robert could come to Macon tomorrow evening. There are some things we need to discuss as a family. Next steps, with everything that's happened." "Of course," Sarah said immediately. "What time would you like us there?" 7 o'clock, at George's house. We'll be there." A pause. "Cole, is everything all right?" "It will be," he said quietly. "Thank you, Sarah." He ended the call and dialed the Charlotte number Preston had verified. Beverly Okafor answered on the 3rd ring. Her voice was composed, precise, the voice of a woman who had been waiting for this call without knowing when it would come. "Mrs. Okafor? This is Cole Whitfield. Preston Ware gave me your number." "Yes," she said simply. I've been expecting to hear from someone eventually. Derek isn't as careful as he believes himself to be." Cole listened as Beverly outlined what she had documented over the years since Charlotte. Bank records, text messages, patterns of behavior that matched exactly what George's investigator had found. She had been watching, gathering, waiting for the right moment and the right ally. "I can be in Macon tomorrow evening," she said. "I'll bring my attorney and my complete file." "Thank you," Cole said. "There will be a detective present." "Good." Beverly's voice carried the particular weight of someone who had held something heavy for a very long time. "It's time." Cole called Preston next, confirming what he already knew. The estate transfer had completed 6 days ago. Every account, every property, every holding was now legally and irrevocably his. Nadia's divorce filing, coming before the estate became public, had seemed clever to her. Combined with evidence of criminal conspiracy, it had become another nail in the legal coffin she was building for herself. The criminal attorney, James Morton, was equally clear. The divorce filing actually works against her position. She filed before knowing about the estate, which means she can't claim she was seeking her fair share of marital assets. And the conspiracy evidence makes any attempt to assert spousal rights fundamentally non-viable. Cole absorbed this, then made his final call of the afternoon. Nadia answered immediately. "Hey," he said, letting warmth enter his voice. "I was thinking, would you come to dinner at Dad's house tomorrow? Around 7? Being there? It helps me process everything." "Of course," Nadia said, her voice carrying the careful concern she had been performing since his discharge. "Whatever you need. Do you want me to bring anything?" "Just you," Cole said quietly. "Thank you." He ended the call and sat in the deepening afternoon light. Nadia would arrive tomorrow believing the estate was still in motion, believing she needed to keep him calm and cooperative just a little longer, believing she had planned for every contingency except the one sitting in this kitchen. She did not know her parents were already on their way to Macon. She did not know Beverly Okafor was boarding a flight from Charlotte, with a file containing 3 years of documented pattern. She did not know Detective Price would be on the porch with a case built strong enough to withstand any attorney's attempts to dismantle it. She did not know that Cole had spent 40 hours in a hospital bed building the most precise thing he had ever engineered: consequences. Cole stood and walked to the counter where he had placed the folder containing everything: bank records, traffic camera stills, phone logs, wire transfer documentation. He straightened it carefully, precisely, the way his father had straightened his work shirts every Sunday evening. Then he went upstairs to prepare the room where truth would finally have its moment. The next evening, at 6:55, Cole heard Nadia's car in the driveway. He straightened his jacket, checked that Sarah and Robert were seated comfortably in the living room, and walked to the front door. When he opened it, Nadia smiled, the same smile she had given him for 8 years. He stepped aside to let her enter. Nadia stepped into George's house with the practiced grace she had perfected over 8 years of marriage. Her heels clicked softly on the hardwood floor, the same floor George had swept every Sunday morning before his weekly call to Cole. She registered her parents' presence in the living room with only the slightest hesitation in her stride. A fracture of composure so brief most people would have missed it, but Cole noticed. He had spent 8 years watching her perform, though he hadn't known it was a performance until now. "Mom? Daddy?" Nadia's voice carried warmth and surprise in perfect measure. She moved to embrace her mother, the gesture fluid and natural. "I didn't expect you both here." Sarah Fontaine stood to receive her daughter's hug, her own movements slightly stiffer. Robert Fontaine remained seated, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, his eyes fixed on a point just past his daughter's shoulder. "Cole asked us to come," Sarah said quietly. "He said we needed to talk as a family." "Of course," Nadia said, turning to embrace her father, who stood reluctantly. "With everything that's happened, it's important we're all together." She smiled at Cole, the same smile she had given him thousands of times before. "This is thoughtful of you, bringing everyone—" "Sit down, Nadia." Cole's voice was not loud. It carried no anger, no theatrics, but something in its stillness made Nadia's smile freeze for just a fraction of a second. She sat on the couch beside her mother, smoothing her skirt with practiced precision. Cole remained standing in the center of the room. The evening light through the windows cast his shadow long across the floor his father had swept so carefully for so many years. He did not pace. He did not gesture. He simply stood, as still as he had been in that hospital bed, and began to speak. "2 weeks ago, in my hospital room, you whispered something in my ear. You thought I couldn't hear you. You were wrong." Nadia's face remained composed, but her fingers tightened slightly on the fabric of her skirt. "You told me Derek's man wasn't supposed to leave so much evidence. You told me you had planned it better than I could imagine. You told me everything your father built would come to you, because you filed before the estate went public." Sarah Fontaine made a small sound. Robert's jaw tightened visibly. "Over the past 3 years," Cole continued, his voice maintaining its careful evenness, "you moved $94,000 from our joint accounts. Small amounts, carefully timed. All of it went to a Florida LLC you built with Derek Okafor." Nadia started to speak. Cole continued as if she hadn't moved. "The LLC made a wire transfer to a private security contractor in South Carolina. A man with a prior arrest for vehicular assault. The same man whose name is on the registration of the black SUV that followed my truck for 11 minutes across 4 intersections before impact." He placed a thick folder on the coffee table. He did not open it. "I have everything, Nadia. Bank records, phone logs, traffic camera footage. The 22-minute call between Derek and the contractor the night before the accident. In approximately 36 hours, all of it goes to the district attorney's office." He paused. "I wanted you to hear it from me first, out of respect for what I once thought we had." Nadia's performance began immediately, tears welling up, hands trembling slightly. "Cole, this is insane. I don't know what you think you heard, but you were injured, confused. And Derek, he's just a business associate. You've always been so distant, so unavailable emotionally. I've spent years trying to reach you." Sarah Fontaine watched her daughter with an expression of dawning horror, not at the accusations, but at the precision of the performance she was finally allowing herself to see. Robert Fontaine sat in absolute stillness, his jaw clenched so tight the muscle visibly jumped. When Nadia finished, Cole spoke quietly. "You leaned over my hospital bed and told me Derek's man didn't leave enough evidence. You told me I wasn't going to make it. You told me you planned it better than I could imagine." The performance collapsed. Not dramatically. Nadia was too skilled for that. But something in her eyes went flat and cold, like a door closing. Cole walked to the front door and opened it. Detective Alonzo Price stood on the porch in a dark suit. Beside him was a composed woman in her 40s, Beverly Okafor, and a man Cole recognized as her attorney. "Beverly's attorney has already filed documents that freeze every account you and Derek built together," Cole said, his voice still quiet. "And Derek, who I understand you've been having trouble reaching, is currently being interviewed by 2 county sheriffs in Fulton County." He stepped aside, holding the door open. "Goodbye, Nadia. 8 months passed like water over stone, smoothing rough edges but leaving the foundation intact." George's house in Macon stood transformed. Cole had opened up the walls with careful precision, letting light pour through spaces his father had never imagined but would have appreciated. The bones remained exactly where George had placed them, load-bearing walls still carrying their original weight. But now sunlight streamed through new windows and doorways in ways that made the whole structure feel both older and newer at once. The old Ford sat in the garage, its reinforced door panel a quiet reminder of George's foresight. Cole drove it when he needed to think, when decisions required the specific kind of clarity that came from sitting behind the same wheel his father had gripped for decades. The legal consequences had fallen with the same precision Cole brought to every structural calculation. Darrell Faust, the contractor who drove the SUV, broke first. Faced with attempted murder charges and irrefutable evidence, he provided a complete statement within 48 hours. He named Derek Okafor as the man who hired him, detailed the $18,000 payment from the Florida LLC, and described the specific instructions about impact angle and speed. The money that nearly killed Cole had been stolen from his own accounts. Derek Okafor lasted 6 days before self-preservation overwhelmed whatever loyalty he thought he had. With Beverly's attorney freezing every account connected to the LLC and 2 counties investigating his business dealings, Derek made the calculation Cole had known he would make. He talked. His cooperation earned him a reduced sentence, 9 years in a Florida state facility, stripped of every asset Beverly's civil suit could reach. Faust received 12 years. He would serve most of it. Nadia's attorney spent 11 weeks trying to negotiate, approaching the DA's office 4 separate times with offers of cooperation. The DA declined each one. The evidence package Price had assembled was comprehensive enough to secure convictions without requiring Nadia's participation. Her trial lasted 9 days. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. The conviction was complete. Conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree, solicitation of murder, 3 counts of felony wire fraud, 1 count of felony theft by taking. At sentencing, the judge emphasized the premeditated nature of the conspiracy. Not a crime of passion, but a calculated multi-year operation designed to strip a man of his life and his inheritance simultaneously. 22 years. Cole wasn't in the courtroom for any of it. He received the verdict by phone from Price while reviewing scholarship applications at his father's desk. He thanked Price, set down his pen, sat quietly for a moment with the weight of 22 years, then picked up his pen and returned to the applications. There were 34 candidates for 12 spots in the first cohort of the George Whitfield Technical Scholarship at Macon Technical College. The infrastructure consulting firm Cole launched was seeded modestly. He wanted to build it the way George had built things, carefully and without spectacle. They landed a state contract in the 2nd month. Terrence came on as CFO, bringing the same precision to the books that he had brought to unraveling Nadia's financial web. 6 employees now, 2 more offers pending. Aunt Paulette bought a small house 8 minutes away. Sunday dinners became a tradition. She told stories about George that Cole had never heard, filling in the spaces of his father's life with details that made the man more complex and more admirable with each passing week. Nadia's father called once after the sentencing. His voice carried the weight of a man confronting something he had chosen not to see for decades. He apologized for his daughter's choices, for not seeing her clearly, for the years Cole spent in a marriage built on calculation rather than love. Cole told him there was nothing to apologize for. He told him George had always liked him, which was true, and which seemed to mean something to the man on the other end of the line. They spoke for 20 minutes. Neither mentioned calling again. Some conversations are meant to close chapters, not open new ones. Now, on a quiet Tuesday evening, Cole drove the old Ford through Macon with the windows down, the air finally cooling after a long summer. He passed the intersection where the accident happened, the skid marks long since washed away. The corner looking like any other corner. He didn't slow down. The woman he met at the city planning meeting, an architect who had asked him, with genuine curiosity, if he ever slowed down long enough to enjoy what he was building, had texted earlier to confirm dinner. He smiled and replied, yes. He thought about his father as he drove, the quiet man who built an empire in silence and patience, and left it for his son like a letter that took a lifetime to write. The road stretched long ahead, beautiful in the evening light, and Cole Whitfield was exactly where he was supposed to be. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.